Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hoye, clinical psychologist,
and Kyle Miller, licensed counselor. Psychology Talk is a unique conversation about psychology around the globe. We speak with psychology experts to keep you informed about current issues and trends. We advocate toward reducing stigma and educate about mental health.
While you're listening, please take a moment to give us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or your favorite streaming service. It helps us to continue providing you with quality programming. And now, enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. I'm Dr. Scott Hoye. Today my guest is Stephanie Taylor from PresenceLearning. PresenceLearning provides therapy tools and live online special education related services, as well as behavioral and mental health services for children pre-K to 12 in schools nationwide. Today, Stephanie and I will be discussing the PresenceLearning platform. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Well, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I am Stephanie Taylor, as you already mentioned. I'm a school psychologist by training. I did start off as a special education teacher, so I really came up through the academic portion, I guess, of schools. And after being a special education teacher for a bit, and I had access to a really great school psychologist, and I saw how important they were in my world, not only in providing me with information that I needed to plan my students' academic courses and their scope and sequence, and also to understand their strengths and weaknesses, but really also to just understand a bit more about behavioral and mental health services. So I returned to graduate school after 6 years of teaching to pursue my my school psychology degree, and then practiced in public education for quite a while until I became the state school psychology consultant for the state of Idaho. And then I ended up with PresenceLearning.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. And so you really know kind of the backbone of what school psychology and education and special education needs are for folks. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I like to think that I do, but of course things change. Okay. Well, things always change.
Don't sell yourself short. I'm sure they do, but well, tell us a little bit about the platform and how this is helping people right now in school psychology and special education.
Yeah, the PresenceLearning platform was really developed. We started well prior to the pandemic. We've been in business for over 12 years now, and we kind of went into the market with this idea that we could help schools get access to services by reallocating supply and demand, essentially. Mm-hmm. I know one of the things I didn't mention about me is that I do currently live in rural Idaho, and I have lived in rural Idaho for a long time. And as a school psychologist and as a special ed director in a small district, I really it was hard every year to try to get related services professionals. So speech pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, school psychologists. Every year I had to spend most of my summer doing interviews and beating down doors and trying to find people who would come and deliver services in my school, because it's rural. We're a little bit out of the way. Not a lot of people wanted to move to our community. And that was one of the things that really drew me to the idea of PresenceLearning, which is we can get services to schools and to students without asking people to move, to relocate. And that allows us to kind of, like, as I said, reallocate the supply and demand, because there are pockets of the nation where there are some places have an excess of providers and some places have no providers. Mm-hmm. And some places have people who aren't engaging in a traditional job market for school psychology or for school services, because they don't necessarily want to be a 40-hour-a-week employee, or they don't want to travel to the school, or they don't want to, maybe they want to work part-time, or maybe they have young children at home, and they really would like to be able to engage in it in a way that allows them to be part of the job market, but without the traditional mechanism of the school day and like, doing bus duty and doing lunch duty and all the other things that we do get asked to do, but they will be part of that job market if we allow them this alternate way of participating. So that's something that we have been engaging in well before the pandemic, but a lot of people, their first introduction to the idea of truly remote services was in 2020 and the pandemic. And it was a blessing and a slight bit of a curse, because so many people were able to engage in remote services then, again, whether it be SLPs or OTs or school psychologists or social workers. And they were able to see the way that you really can still connect with students, the way that they can still perform the vast majority of their duties doing it remotely. But some people also didn't really get the best experience doing it, because it was like, oh, March, we immediately have to pivot, and people didn't have a lot of their systems in place. So some have had a bad experience doing remote services. And part of my mission is to kind of flip that narrative to not only show people that this is not something that is relevant only for the pandemic, but it's also something that, even though they might have had a bad experience because of that fast pivot and the lack of planning and processes, doesn't mean that that is truly what the experience of providing remote services is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that people in a broad spectrum of services in mental health and otherwise are really finding that out. Remote work is kind of mushrooming, I think, through the pandemic, and people are seeing that they can do it. They can shift their lifestyles a bit, have different hours, keep different hours, work on how to kind of pivot and create their own work-life boundaries in however way, shape, or form they want to. Well, it must have been jarring. We've been hearing it's been very jarring for students to have gone remote and then go back into schools and then go back to remote. I think that's been kind of bandied about in the media a lot. What about the platform? I mean, I've taken a look at the website, and we'll have a link to it, obviously, in the show notes so people can check it out. What about your platform is different from other platforms? I'll let you explain that. I see it's really a nicely laid out platform with a lot of great applications like testing abilities and whatnot. But I'll let you speak to that.
Thank you. We're super proud of it. It's our proprietary platform, and we put a lot of time and effort and thought into it. We always say that it's built by clinicians for clinicians, because it's really informed by what we need to provide a interactive and quality therapy and assessment. So the original version of the PresenceLearning platform, or I should say the original application, was not only do we allow schools to access our platform that has quality content that we reach out to publishers and we license it from them and we add it to our platform so that those things are embedded already within the PresenceLearning platform. And that's also assessments, as you mentioned. So we reach out to all the major publishers, we license their assessments, we put them into our platform, and you can access them, access all the stimulus items, access all the manuals, access the record forms, the scoring, the student booklets. Everything that you need is accessed digitally through our platform, and it just makes the application very smooth.
Yeah.
And so we have not only the platform, but we also provide the access to staffing as well. So PresenceLearning, we contract with school psychologists, social workers, SLPs, OTs, but during 2020, we realized, again, the need where there were people who needed to switch to being an online delivery, but they didn't need the staffing component. They really just needed the access to the proprietary platform. Mm-hmm. So we started something called Therapy Essentials, where they can just purchase access to the platform and use their own staff with it. And then subsequently, we also launched a version for private practice where someone can buy a monthly subscription or a yearly subscription to the platform and utilize it for their private practice as well. So, we're really trying to make sure that everybody who might want to engage in remote service delivery can engage in it with the interactive tools in our platform and take advantage of the licensing and the legwork that we do for them.
Which can you kind of tell us what assessments are available? Because this is something that I've noted that has kind of, remote work has kind of put the kibosh to a certain extent on psychological testing for me. What is available in the platform?
We started off, so our first big equivalency study. So that's the other thing to note, is that we have participated, and by we, I mean that PresenceLearning has offered up our platform for equivalency studies to determine, that offering something remote was equivalent to doing it in person. And of course, we utilize, or I shouldn't say of course, but I always say of course, because we talk about A. Jordan Wright quite a bit from NYU and how he was the principal investigator in most of our studies. And so, we really made sure that it had fidelity, that it went through an institutional review board, that it was a good peer-reviewed study. And we first started with the Woodcock-Johnson, both cognitive and achievement. Riverside's been an invaluable partner from the beginning. And we've added the Batteria, the oral language, the ECAD, the early childhood. So all the suite of products from Riverside. We also have an agreement. We contract with Pearson. So anything that you can get through the Q Global, you can also access through PresenceLearning's platform.
Now,
so
the question would be like,
and also a couple extra.
Yeah, those are expensive. I mean, are they anything on Q Global, which is exciting to me, or is it just specific to child psychology? Like, would it be a WACE? Would it be, not a WACE, but a WISC?
Yeah. So I mean, we
children,
have,
or is it the full spectrum?
Yeah, we have the staple, or that's what I consider the staples from Pearson through Q Global. So we have the WISC Spanish, the WACE, the Wyatt, the memory scales. We have the KTEA. We have, now I'm trying to think of all. Essentially, anything that you could access as a direct-to-student assessment through Q Global. Okay. I say that as direct-to-student assessment because we don't typically have rating scales on our platform, because that's something that you can already access really well through third-party publishers, where you can send out, they have their systems where you can send out the email for people to fill out the rating scale and send it back. Okay. So that's not something we've incorporated at this time, but anything that's a direct-to-student assessment that was available via Q Global, we have. We also have agreements with WPS. We have agreements with ATP. We have agreements with ProEd. We have an insane number of assessments and the amount of content on our platform.
So this would behoove one to, even if you I don't typically work with anything below in age group children, but at this point in time, mostly work with adolescents. But even someone myself could use this just as a standalone private practice and utilize all of these tools, right? Yeah. And so
yes, you can do a monthly or an annual subscription as a private practice person, and you can access all of our assessments and our therapy content.
Okay. How is the video platform compared to, say, DoxyMe or some other telehealth platform? Is it pretty good?
Absolutely.
Oh, you're not going to say, this is a terrible platform. Go with Doxy.
Of course, I'm going to be like,
yeah, right,
no, it's really second class. No.
Yeah, you wouldn't say that. I get that.
But there are two things that really stand out to me. And the first one is bandwidth. Because we know historically, and we have worked with so many schools across the nation that do have horrid bandwidth. I mean, I always make fun of myself because, again, where I live in rural Idaho, I only have access to satellite internet. Literally, that's the only option I have. That's it. And the PresenceLearning platform takes a substantially less amount of bandwidth than even like Zoom or any of the other video platforms you're going to run into. And we built that specifically because there are so many schools that do not have solid and reliable broadband. So that's the first thing, is the bandwidth that it takes to actually be able to utilize it. And then the second thing that I would say, which makes it substantially different from anything else, is the level of interactivity. As I mentioned, it's not just a video platform. We have a whiteboard with interactive tools. We have games. We have content. We have, it's something called TextWrite, which is like a version of an internal kind of Google Docs where you can save progress if you're going to do, any type of interactive notes in the future. So the robustness of the ability to actually like engage children is vastly superior to any traditional video conferencing platform.
Oh yeah, I can tell that just by a summary, a glance at the platform on your website. It's really nice. Are you planning on like expanding marketing this to other psychologists who might not be school psychologists? I mean, because it sounds like it's pretty much very robust, as you're saying, across the board. It sounds like it's a very good platform.
Yes. So especially the individual subscription version, the one where you can buy either a monthly or annual subscription, that's considered more for private practice. That is definitely something that we are mostly targeting, well, at least in the psychology world, other than speech pathologists and OTs, we're very much targeting clinical psychologists for that. And because of the reason that mostly clinical psychologists have private practices in comparison to school psychologists, as far as like the number obviously is just vastly different. And one of the things that we're spending quite a bit on in the near future is not only having, like, we just are so proud and really love our interactivity features, as I mentioned, but we're in that process of building in more of those practice management features that people are typically used to, which is like calendaring, scheduling, sending out, reminders, being able to connect to insurance billing. Like, we're working on that set of features so that we can really hone in on the needs of more of that private practice market.
Okay, excellent. Well, how is this affecting, like you mentioned a little bit, maybe we can step back away from the platform and ask how maybe the platform itself is opening up more access to people working in school districts in the capacity of a social worker, psychologist, which I have to tell you from my experience, just being in private practice, so many parents are frustrated at the dearth of access to such services, even in a large school district like here in Chicago, right? Aside from the funding to pay for such positions being cut left and right, how might such a platform as yours help even an inner city school district to provide the services a lot more readily?
I think it comes down to a couple of big highlights. And the first one is, I know that I've spoken a lot about rural just because that's, of course, my personal experience and kind of like my impetus for being interested in this, but, or my catalyst. But I should say that we work with a lot of very large metropolitan areas as well, because what they have learned is, as you mentioned, it's not typically that you have like one school psychologist that stays at one building all day, every day, or one social worker that stays at one building all day, every day. They not only have to commute, they have to drive around. They have to, they have it on their schedule that they're going to assess a certain student a certain day. They drive to that school. That student is not there, even though they checked on Power School prior and made sure that student was there, but they are not there. There's all those things. And it leads to a level of inefficiency and a waste of the provider's time that doing it remotely actually takes away, because you don't have to drive to that school. You don't have to spend time stuck in traffic. And if that student isn't there, you can immediately pivot to a different school. You can immediately say, all right, sorry, I can't test student A today, so I'm going to jump over and reach out to school B and see if they will bring in student B and we can get this going. So that's the first part, is just like what I call, what we just call windshield time, and all those sort of like little bits of time that get eaten away in not being dedicated to one school all the time. And then secondarily, it's the level of efficiency with the tools themselves. So usually administering an assessment takes roughly the same time remotely as it does in person. There's no good way around that. I mean, it is what it is. Like, you have to go through their questions, and it kind of ends up being what it is. But documenting it, writing reports, doing some of the, especially for therapies, like for doing counseling and therapy, we have a lot of tools built into our platform that really help to streamline that documentation piece and the, report writing piece. And I think that's another thing that leads to like efficiency across the board, where people are able to, get more done in the time that they have available because they're utilizing tools that help them to do so, rather than, a really traditional and almost analog approach to services.
Yeah, which has its pros and cons. Obviously, seeing somebody in person, you'll get more of an observation about what they are like, I guess, as far as a mental status exam. But we're learning, I'm sure, as the tools grow and our capacity to read people online, right,
Yeah.
and utilize that. Yeah.
And actually, I want to push back on that just a tiny bit, because one of the things that, that I have really learned, and we have learned, but I'll speak from a personal perspective, is in the last, so we started offering psychoeducational assessments in 2016. And we also do classroom observations remotely. We, watch or obviously assess the student remotely, and really have focused on doing as much of the work of a school psychologist as possible, but doing it remotely. And over the years, I feel like I have, that the quality of information that I'm able to get remotely does easily rival what I was able to get in person. And if I think about it this way, it's like, so I'm asked to come in and assess a student, for example. The student, maybe this is initial eval, right? The student hasn't been on my radar before. I don't have any interactions with them yet. This is my first introduction to them. Doing classroom observations remotely,
well, what a wonderful way. I'm
in
thinking like, basically it's like having a fly on the wall viewpoint. Yeah.
Exactly, because any psychologist knows that when you walk into the room, even if you try to slide in the back and you sit in the back of the classroom, it changes the dynamic of the classroom, and everyone starts looking at you like, "Are you here for me? Who are you watching? What are you doing?" And they change their behaviors. But when it's a camera, they don't know.
Exactly. It's kind of like having, the two-way mirror thing, right?
Exactly.
Used to be used in training, and sometimes it's still for like family systems and whatnot. But
right.
I don't think I'm going to my private clientele in my practice are going to allow me to watch how they interact with their families at home remotely.
Fair.
That's not good, and I don't want to do that. But yeah, I can see how this definitely could help as far as like being able to observe classrooms remotely.
Sure. And I think the second thing that I wanted to push on just a little bit with that statement is also that I don't think remote like service delivery or remote assessment is ever going to 100% replace the necessity of some students are going to need, or some clients are going to need in-person services regardless, or some are going to need a hybrid. And that's, I think, the beauty of it, though, is it allows you the efficiency of being able to do the things remotely that make sense to do remotely. And then that kind of like frees up your time to do the things in person that have to be done in person. Yeah,
that's true. I would, yeah, absolutely. I think that people will adapt to it. We adapt to everything. And, but really the dearth of school psychologists, I'm wondering that how much like will systems like yours, do you think will change the procedures post-pandemic for school psychologists, knowing that whether you're rural or urban or somewhere in between, there's going to be, school systems just don't apply a lot of funding to psychology and social work within schools. So do you think that the platforms will shape and the school districts like changing systems will also change the platforms? I mean, that's a good, totally, you can look in your crystal ball, Stephanie. I mean, if you have one.
Yeah, I mean, my crystal ball has been a bit fuzzy lately, so I'm going to give it my best guess.
Okay.
I think that regardless of, let's talk about just the workforce for a second. As I mentioned, I think the workforce has changed substantially through the pandemic. Just that many people got a glimpse of working from home and, utilizing different ways of like, quote unquote, being in the office. And I think that is going to be a huge driver in the future. Again, if we're talking about the fact that, staffing and supply demand of these related services professionals is already an issue. And I think that the pandemic has exacerbated that in a way that people are like, no, I definitely want to work from home. That's more enjoyable for me. And so I think that's the first thing is we just have to be realistic about what the workforce is going to dictate in the future. But then if I take a step back and speak directly to, I guess, the professional portion of it, I think that it's a couple of things. I really hope, and my fingers crossed, that schools will really dedicate some resources to mental health and to, these services in the future. There's always been, and I hate to say this because I don't want to sound negative whatsoever, but, I can clearly trace back even to like the school shootings at Columbine and ever since, so we're talking about 20 years of discussions in legislature about resources going to schools, and it doesn't always translate or has not yet substantially translated into direct mental health services for students. A lot of places use it for, cameras or resource officers or, I guess locks on doors or different things. And again, I'm not begrudging them the fact that they've got to make improvements in other areas as well. But I do hope at some point that translates into actual resources put towards services for students in the school setting. And I think that I hope that happens.
Yeah. Well,
in the pandemic, because so many kids everyone's just feeling so isolated. And I think if that does happen, that's going to be a direct impact on, as I mentioned, there's a certain level of like behavioral services or, students who are perhaps low functioning that are always going to need somebody in person and is never going to be a candidate for remote delivery. Mm-hmm. But I'm hoping that at some point the value of talk therapy, and especially remote, where it is somebody outside of their community that they don't have history with, it's somebody that doesn't know their parents. In fact, it might be somebody that's even a better cultural match than somebody that they are able to contract with locally.
Yeah.
I think those are some of the valuable points of really looking forward to how, if the money is allocated to the right, in the right way, that teletherapy can really help advance what is offered to students.
Yeah, well, like what you're saying, I mean, there's so much to unpack and so many possibilities out there because of the kind of reshifting of people's priorities and how they're living their lives in the pandemic. But it just, it's not like, society didn't fall apart because of it. It really allowed you to have some time to think about, well, this doesn't seem to be working. Maybe this would work better. Or, like it's basically kind of like showing what the cracks in all the systems in our society have been kind of working towards, or maybe working on a shoestring budget or a wing and a prayer, as they used to say in some parts. Yeah. I mean, we're kind of getting off the beaten path here, but I'm just thinking of like the implementation. It's been part of curriculum here by law to have social and emotional learning in schools here. And of course, Castle's over at UIC, and I mean, that's been a big nationwide thrust for that, for more emotional intelligence within the schools. But having kind of observed schools during my graduate program doing that, trying to implement that, it's difficult. It's really difficult because it's a system-wide kind of approach to shifting to a more heart-based or a more social connection-based way of looking at schooling, rather than taking a child and unscrewing the top of their head and pouring ideas and ethics and morality into them and shifting them off to post high school education or whatnot, life after school. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that have to be done. I think that if, hopefully platforms such as PresenceLearning's platforms and just this thrust towards this can be part of that shift towards more school psychologists, which hopefully would be implementing more of that kind of cultural shift within schools, so that mental health is a big chunk of the caretaking of the children, rather than just making sure they pass math, science, and art and other curricula.
And one of the things I think is super important to consider right now that is slightly different is, if you want to take a traditional view on, like multi-tiered systems of support, as you mentioned, so like SocialEmotional Learning and the Castle, it really does break down of like, this is what is for the general education and the general population, and we assume that this instruction, these social-emotional learning standards, are going to be applied and understood by like 80% of students. And then, of course, we go on to tier 2, which is
let's not even get on about faculty and administration.
Okay, great. So let me just put this one point.
Yeah.
Is that after the pandemic, I think something a really important takeaway is that there's almost no tier 1 anymore.
Yeah.
So, you do need you need tier 1 to really be working for like 80% of your general population in order to determine what tier 2 is and what tier 3 is. And right now, it seems across the board that what we're hearing from schools and what they're seeing is that there's just no tier 1 anymore. They're not at 70 or 80% of success with the bulk of their students. And I think that's why it's so important to readdress this and to say that it potentially can't be solved with general education applications or like large group or whole classrooms, that we are in a point where we may need to really target small groups and have a slightly more targeted instruction in order to, get back to where tier 1 is working for most students. But right now, that doesn't seem to be what we're hearing from schools.
Yeah. Well, and my point about implementing something like SEL, you're right. I think smaller classrooms I think that's what you're getting at, right, Stephanie? Like having smaller classrooms and more focused educational platforms and just more one-on-one connection.
Yes. More one-on-one and more small group connection.
Yeah.
To get us back to where, to get to where they feel like they're back to a traditional tier 1.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's another path to go down. But my observation from social and emotional learning being implemented in classrooms, it was difficult because of the even in a small public elementary, for instance, just the gargantuan amount of problems and issues you might have to deal with as an administrator to somehow incorporate and get what SEL, social and emotional learning, is about. It's a little bit of a shift. It's a paradigm shift, or at least a decent little reframe in your head that you have to do. It's difficult to do that when you're used to implementing administrative tasks and education in a certain way.
It definitely is. And I think something that I am always so sympathetic about and feel so much for our administrators and our school personnel is that, as you mentioned, even in states where SEL is a mandated thing and where they are tracking those standards, that at the end of the day, schools really are still judged on their state testing, on their state testing scores. Yeah. And so, if I am a teacher who is already just struggling with the amount of time that I have available to me to do all of the curriculum and the content that I need to be able to do for students to perform well on their state exams, then if you're also asking me to implement some social emotional learning and to do some, some additional lesson plans that way, if I, it's like, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul. And the students are going to have to perform on academic tests, but they're not asked to perform on social emotional tests. And it really just does, I think, put teachers and school personnel in such a rock and a hard place about what they can spend their time doing. And that's, I think, again, why I'm saying that, having professionals who can actually administer these things and taking that burden off of teachers to be the jack of every trade is really important in the progress of students.
I would agree. And I think that's where more school social workers, counselors, psychologists, maybe that's where the bulk of that can come from, in the future in public schools, right? I mean, private schools can do as they wish. And a lot of them do come from like Waldorf schools or Montessori. They do come from a smaller, more contained environment, which probably has, you could argue, social emotional learning is just built into the platform with, without even, it's a different beast. And it's it's totally different.
It
totally
is a different beast.
But not everybody can afford those beasts. So a lot of us do rely on public education, as I did and many other people have and will in the future. So hopefully we can work towards that as a society to implement things like that. Yeah.
I'm a proud public education student.
Yep.
That's what I attended. That's what I worry about now. And, not that we don't also have the same services available to private schools, but I think that if we solve for the harder setting, then we'll solve for all settings.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully, the PresenceLearning and your work and everyone else's work at the company can be part of that shift overall for the future. Is there anything else you might want to mention about the platform, or any ideas on the subject that this can of worms that we've opened up here?
I think that for me, the biggest thing of note is that, PresenceLearning really is the largest provider of telehealth services to schools in the nation. And as such, we really care and take pride in continuing to improve and develop. And so all these things that we're talking about, all this stuff that, we're discussing today, but as well as my counterpart, because I'm the clinical director of psychoeducational services at PresenceLearning, but I have a counterpart who is the clinical director of speech and language pathology services and of occupational therapy services. And, we are working every single day on how to improve the platform for all clinical, use cases. And so not just schools, but also to private practice and an individual. And, really continuing that idea of it's built by clinicians for clinicians. That's something we continue to work on, is that as clinicians talk to us about what it is that they need and what it is that they would find valuable in the platform to make their students engage more, to make it more usable for them. That's really where the future of our build out is, because we've had our own platform for a while, our own proprietary platform. And so now it's just about can we give people what they need? And that's really where our focus is now.
Okay. So, what kind of feedback are you getting, and what are you incorporating from the providers that are using the platform?
We have a feedback mechanism within our network. So, people can submit ideas, they can submit, suggestions, questions, whatever. And then we take all of those as the product development team and we look back through them. So one of the things is always just adding additional assessments, right? What's the assessments and the content that they need? Some of it is, how can we incorporate a better documentation system? What are the pieces of practice management they're missing? We also try very much to kind of cover the gamut of what types of therapy services they'd be providing. So people might let us know, you know what, you guys have a lot of stuff that is for middle school social emotional health, or you have a lot of things that are for high schoolers, but you don't have that much for elementary. And then I take that very seriously, and I'm like, okay, great. I got to go find a publisher who will license us their things for elementary on these specific topics. That's a lot of it. And then also just building out, just focusing really hard on what are the additional efficiency tools that we can provide? So can we tell people, our metadata for other practitioners who have had fifth graders that are working on this particular expressive language skill, or whatever we could say a social emotional skill. These are the activities that have been most used by other practitioners, that it pops up and tells them, like, this is the stuff that you should use, and this is the information that, or not should use, but this is something you should consider because it's highly utilized, and it's one of the highest rated activities. So we're really trying to, and I think this is something that just really matters to me personally, because I remember being a new practitioner and getting my counseling caseload and sitting down and thinking, like, okay, so I need to figure out a scope and sequence for this entire year for these different students and what they need with their ages and presenting problems. And, and it was a little bit, it's sort of daunting when you're new. And then there's so many programs that are available to you that like self-teaching or teaching yourself every program, how it's organized, it's a lot. And so we're really trying to work on things that give people that little bit of information, at least, to say, for the students with a similar presenting problem, a similar age, these are great things. Or we also do a lot of professional development, or CEU series, to teach people about the different programs that we have available, so that they can come and learn about, here's some content that we've licensed, and you can come and hear about it and hear how to use it. You don't have to teach yourself how to do it. We're going to bring the authors into you and have the authors of that program talk to you about how to do it. So, and in the meantime, you're also going to get, NASP CPDs for it. So we really try to give our network, anybody that uses the PL platform, that information and that cushion to help them be the, practice at the top of their license, as we often say.
Excellent. Well, I mean, it's an exciting platform. I hope everybody who's interested in the learning and behavioral health fields take a look at it, should you be interested. And where can they find that?
They can access all the information that I discussed at PresenceLearning.com. I know you said you didn't put it in the notes, but at PresenceLearning.com, not only can you find information about the monthly subscriptions, you can find out information for school users, you can find out information about all the research that was done on our platform. You can find out, you can see all of our success videos from schools and other practitioners who have utilized our platform, and how they have made it successful for them. Everything you want to see is on our platform, or is on our website at PresenceLearning.com.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie Taylor, for visiting us today on the Psychology Talk podcast. Thank you for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. This podcast is intended for informative and entertainment purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. All material, copyright, the Psychology Talk podcast. Music is provided by the oddly Italianate named band Serenati. Ciao.